Let's completely shift gears now and bring you this conversation. The importance of accurate interpretation in criminal proceedings simply cannot be overstated. It enables defendants to fully understand the charges they're facing and also enables them to actively participate in their own defense to ensure a fair trial. However, a lack of legal terminology in some of South Africa's languages does pose significant challenges in accurate interpretation, particularly in cases where an accused's freedom, their rights, or even their good name is at stake. Let's get a better understanding of the profession and what it takes to pull it off at a senior level. Bring in senior court interpreter Lungi Ngaphi, who joins us now via our video link. Lungi, it's so lovely to see you in this context. We've been seeing you for much of the week gone by. Welcome to the SABC News Channel.
Thank you for having me, guys. It is quite a humbling experience as well to be invited on a platform of this kind. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me start off with a caveat. Our discussion is not about the Judicial Conduct Tribunal, which is sitting and which we've watched in the past week. We may make reference to it, but certainly won't be getting to the substance of that matter. I'm more interested in the job that you do, and I think a lot of people would be interested to hear that you actually have a background in radio. So how did you land up in interpreting?
It's quite interesting, though. I started off on radio, as you've put it clearly, and radio is still my first love, by the way. I was busy, looking for a job. The radio where I started, it was a small community radio station, and one realized that you need stability in terms of income. You need security, something very much formal, especially in the government sphere of career. So when a friend of mine told me that, listen, there's an opening or there's positions that are being advertised in the magistrate's office in Port Elizabeth to become a court interpreter, why don't you give it a try? And at the time, she knew that I'm quite conversant in isiXhosa, which is my mother tongue, and Afrikaans, and I had studied in Afrikaans from standard 3 to matric. I did all my high school subjects in Afrikaans. So she said, this is an opportunity, give it a try and see how far it goes. And I had submitted my application. I was shortlisted for interviews. I was given a paragraph to translate or to rather interpret, because there's a difference between translating and interpreting. And with interpreting, we always say, it's when you give the idea that is intended, sticking to the context of what we are talking about. And translation comes in when you do it verbatim, either on a document or you translate in word. And sometimes even in our interpreting job during a court proceeding, you do find yourself sometimes where you are required to translate. But most cases, you always interpret without losing the context. And that's how I landed, as a court interpreter.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up falling in love, even with the space of court interpreting, because it's communication space, basically.
It absolutely is. And so much about it is about making sure that a message is passed through. I can't imagine a situation where you're able to do the job that you do without having a love for languages and linguistics, generally speaking.
Well, we hardly have documents beforehand as interpreters, where you're given a file to say, go and study this and come back prepared after an X amount of a period of time. It's always, we always need to be on our toes. And whatever we interpret in court, you find it on that day, at that particular moment, because you never know what the person is going to say. So you are required to be as efficient and the facts of the matter. You find those in court at that particular moment when you interpret.
Absolutely. And let me apologize to our viewer. Our connection to you, Lungi, isn't the best, but hopefully it'll hold. You speak about thinking on the spot. I imagine you've never imagined yourself in a situation where you'd need to find a Xhosa term for something like a laughing emoji which is a situation you've been in before.
Right.
Take us through perhaps, what goes through your own mind when you try to figure out how to communicate this as best as you can in a context where, let's face it, not every language evolves at the same pace. And so in many ways, some concepts are yet to be coined in certain languages.
Well, fortunately, this is what I've experienced recently in terms of, let me try and get my connection proper. Just, can you give me a second, please?
Sure, not a problem. I suppose this is where I have to come in with the language that I've learned in broadcasting to keep us going. We're in conversation, by the way, with senior court interpreter Lungi Ngaphi. You may have seen her in action at the recent Judicial Conduct Tribunal hearings in Rosebank, but this is not necessarily a conversation about that. It's about the task of interpreting in a country with now 12 official languages. Sign language has also joined that pact. And it's given us an opportunity to speak about the profession, especially when you consider just how important it is to make sure that justice is not only served, but is seen to be served. Many people in our country, of course, are more comfortable with their home languages, which may very well not be English, and would prefer, of course, that a different language is used in these very complex legal processes at times. We'll continue our discussion with Lungi Ngaphi in just a moment. Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. Let's continue our discussion now with senior court interpreter Lungi Ngaphi, speaking to us about the profession and everything that comes with it, really. Lungi, once again, thanks very much indeed for speaking to the SABC News Channel. Before we went for that quick break, you were still explaining to us, I suppose, the mechanisms of having to think of a word on the spot to describe a laughing emoji in isiXhosa, for example.
Yes, I think this requires someone that really makes use of their creativity at the same time without losing the context. And remember, each language is unique. Sorry. And I always say to people, this is about us saying, let's develop our languages. Whether you are Sepedi speaking, you are Tswana speaking, you are Venda speaking, it doesn't matter. But let's get into the space where we allow our creative minds to develop terminology, because interpreting is about that. You are required on the spot to develop the language, making sure that you stick to the context and the person that you are interpreting to understands exactly what this is about. And I always say to people, make use of our services in our courtrooms. This is not merely to say that you're not educated enough or you won't understand English enough, but it is merely allowing you as well an opportunity to be able to think properly when it comes to your responses. And myself as an interpreter, I am given an opportunity to grow in terms of using language and in understanding my field, understanding the tool that I am in the space, because I am a tool that's joining everybody to understand one another at a better level.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if, Lungi, you've ever been in a situation where, you've been called upon to use your creativity as you've just explained and have struggled, because it's that complex or that foreign a concept. And with the benefit of hindsight, you've now managed to get around that. I wonder, I'm putting you on the spot at the moment, if you can think of an example where there was a term or a sentence or a concept that you simply just couldn't capture to your satisfaction.
There's been, and I think there's been quite a few, and given the fact that I was doing my own mother tongue, and I had to now think of how do I then interpret this term, or how do I translate? Okay, there was no option of translating, and I ended up using something very much close to English due to a lack of a better word. But then at a later stage, I ended up going and doing a research on how better could I have interpreted that particular terminology. With the recent matter that I interpreted it in, like I said, we've never had emojis for quite a long time, but I found myself having to interpret a specific emoji, and it made sense for me taking it into my mother tongue to say, unodolazana, because the size of this emoji is small. So in my language, in isiXhosa, something that is small can be called unodolazana, because unodoli in isiXhosa, it's a doll in English, but when we look at the size of it, it's small. So when I looked at the emojis, I went, okay, it's a small anyana face that is laughing in a particular manner. So I can name it unodolazana okikitekayo. And that's the laughing emoji to a point where it's literally lying sideways, the manner in which it's laughed. So I'm explaining the position of this nodolazana and what this nodolazana is doing. It's laughing out loud. Unodolazana okikitekayo. It's got to do with the picture that one creates when you're doing interpreting, because I believe that your brain will require a picture form when we are busy with words.
Yeah.
We can be having words put together in a sentence form, but when I'm bringing it to you as an interpreter, I should be able to give your brain a picture of what I'm saying. Then you are able to respond based on that.
Absolutely, Lungi. I'll tell you, you've liberated an entire community of people. We are speaking about onodolozana abakhalayo, abahlekayo, abagijimayo, because of what you've managed to share with us through your creativity. You know, as we're speaking, I'm reminded of a Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has really been a part of my own thinking, especially when I was in university, especially because of what he thinks about language. He made a very controversial decision to write in Kikuyu at some stage, and he believes that we need to actively invest in our languages, write in them, think in them, cry in them, laugh in them, for these languages to continue to grow. And I wonder to what extent you reckon we are doing that sufficiently in our country because of the richness of the culture that typically accompanies these different languages.
I like what you just said. We need to really be, we need to be intentional about it. And I always say to my sister when I speak to her, I say, but do you dream in any other language except your own mother tongue? And she goes, it's actually true. You don't dream in another language when you speak a particular language. If you are Tsonga speaking, I don't think you will dream in isiXhosa because you are not Xhosa speaking, you are Tsonga speaking. Why can't we develop our languages? And in developing them, that's that we need to know that as an interpreter, you are required to love reading because that's where the betterment of your language use will come from. You read more, you listen attentively, you accommodate people because we work with people in the space of interpreting. You need to be someone who loves talking. Imagine if you want to become an interpreter and you are someone who doesn't like to talk, you'll be in the wrong space. You can't find an interpreter that doesn't love talking because we are about developing what we are doing. We end up falling in love with it. There's many of us, many people that have actually trained me. Some of them have become my mentors, and I used to sit and watch them and listen to them.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I'll make sure that I watch more news. I will listen attentively to the language use, the terminology that is used, and then I will read more.
Right.
And I will expose myself into talking to people more. Because remember, another thing is I interpret Afrikaans as well. I was never born speaking Afrikaans, but I managed to do Afrikaans as the first language from standard 3 to matric. I did all my subjects in Afrikaans.
Sure.
How did I master that? I made sure that I read more.
Right. Lungi, if, being an interpreter is about being talkative, perhaps I'm in the wrong profession, but that's a conversation for another day. Really appreciate the time. That's all the time we have, at least this morning. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Lungi Ngaphi is a senior court interpreter.